Hello, and welcome to our discussion on the properties of water for biology. Shortly, I'm going to share my screen with you. So this lesson will coincide with the notes properties of water. So the water molecule, as you should know by now, is made up of 3 atoms, 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. And these atoms are bonded together by a covalent bond, meaning the electrons in hydrogen and oxygen are being shared. One of the key properties of water is polarity. And when you see the word polarity, you should be thinking like the North and South Pole, or the poles of a magnet where there's a positive end and a negative end. So water has polarity. It has poles. It has more electrons at one end or pole than the other. And this causes there to be opposite charges at either end. The end that has more electrons is going to end up with more of a negative charge. And that's because electrons have a negative charge. So if we're making the connections, what's the charge of electrons? Electrons have a negative charge. Which element has more electrons between oxygen and hydrogen? That's going to be oxygen. Oxygen has 8 electrons, 6 in its outer ring. Hydrogen just has the 1. And then what element is more likely to have the negative charge? If you remember, oxygen has 8, electrons have a negative charge, so oxygen will have the greater negative charge between the 2 elements that are found in water. So if we draw water showing the charged ends, this is what it would look like. This is a Bohr drawing. I ignored the protons and neutrons, but we're focusing on the electrons. So you can see there's extra electrons here and extra electrons here, and that's because two are already paired, and these 2 are already paired, but these 2 are shared, these 2 are shared to form the covalent bonds. So there's a slightly negative end on this side and a slightly positive end on this side. This causes water to work like a magnet. It's a very small molecule compared to other molecules, and yet it's at a liquid state. And it's a liquid state because water will stick to other water molecules. Most other molecules of this size and even larger are actually gases. A mixture is 2 or more compounds together. So one of the things about water is that it is able to mix with lots of different things, and living things contain water, and most of the way in which living things function is by how they interact with water. So mixtures are when 2 or more compounds are together, but the compounds don't change. They stay in their present state. They just mix. And there's 2 basic types of mixtures. One is called a solution. A solution is an evenly spread out mixture of 2 or more compounds. The compound that there is more of is called the solvent, and the compound that there is less of is the solute. So we describe solutions usually by the amount of or concentration of the solute in the mixture. For example, we'll say this is a 10% salt solution, where we're assuming that the solvent is water. So lemonade is an example of a solution. A suspension is another type where you are unevenly spreading out the mixture, and this is because you usually have unlike materials. So things that are ionically charged or polar will be able to be solutes. If it's like an oil or something like that, it will be a suspension. So Italian dressing is a suspension because the main solvent in it is vinegar, and the solute is going to be, or the other components will be oil and then seasonings, and they don't all mix together, so you have to shake it up before you actually use it. Water, as we said, is the usual solvent in most solutions, so it's tend tend to be referred to as the universal solvent. And that's because it has a slight polarity. So it will easily dissolve molecules. So what you want to think of is like if you add a solute into water, think of it as you have a pile of materials, and water, each water molecule is able to grab onto one of those materials and move around in a random pattern, and that will disperse the materials. So water will grab onto other compounds or ions and cause them to disperse. One of the other things that water does is it can act as a catalyst, meaning like chemical reactions won't take place until they're put into water. So you can take two materials and mix them up in a dry form and they won't interact. But as soon as you add water, it acts as a way to do that. So a chemical ice pack is actually, if you've ever used an ice pack of that type, it usually has like a little pocket in it that you have to pop, and then you shake it up. That pocket usually has water in it, and by releasing the water into the two chemicals, it will cause the chemical reaction to take place. So a catalyst is a term that you should also be aware of in terms of one of the jobs of water when it's in a solvent. So a lot of times when you mix things together, a chemical reaction might take place besides just mixing them together. Water will be attracted to, meaning it can mix with something that is hydrophilic, and those would be things that are going to be polar or ionic, like in the body, sugars and salt. And these, this will cause them to dissolve and be able to be slightly attracted to the positive charge. So if we illustrate that, this is salt. So salt is NaCl. You add the water, the Na will be attracted to the negative end of the water, and the Cl will be attracted to the positive end of the water. Now realize the sodium and the chlorine will still stay. It will still act as, even though they're separated out, they still act as salt, because even when they're in their ionic solution or their ionic compound, they won't really be together. They still are kind of separate ions. Water will not be attracted to waxes or fats, and that's because those are nonpolar. So things that can't mix with water are called hydrophobic. And that's because they have no charge. So their electrons are evenly spread out. So in the case of methane, if you see methane, each of the hydrogens around the carbon are all together. So this is natural gas. Electrons are evenly dispersed. So they will form suspensions. So one of the things that happens in Pennsylvania is a thing called fracking. And what they actually do, what fracking does, is it shoots jets of water deep down into the rock layers. And what they're trying to do is release natural gases, because natural gases won't mix with the water when it's down in those fractured openings that they've created with the high-powered water, and that will cause the gas to move up the column of water. And that's exactly how they get the gas out of the rock layers, through fracking. Hydrogen bonding is what happens between water molecules, but it can also happen between other things as well. Hydrogen bonding is bonding between hydrogen and oxygen of different water molecules or other molecules. Note, hydrogen bonding happens not within a molecule, but between molecules. This is not applicable to you guys anymore, because you guys are not going to be taking this test, or not going to be taking the same test where you're going to be drawing. So water molecules, let me delete this. So water molecules, as you see here, those are covalent bonds. The covalent bonds still exist within, but a hydrogen bond can exist between water molecules by the negative end and the positive end. As I said, they kind of stick together like magnets, and the thing that sticks them together is the hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond's pretty close in strength to an ionic bond. So almost 1/10 of the strength of a covalent bond. So the covalent or the hydrogen bonding allows water to have some specific properties. One is cohesion. It's able to stick with other water molecules, and that's why it forms droplets. Cohesion also means it requires a lot of heat to turn it into vapor. So again, carbon dioxide, if you've ever seen it in solid form, it's called dry ice, and it will stay very, very, very cold, but it turns into gas at just room temperature. Water will take a lot of heat, takes up to 212 degrees to turn water into gas. Again, you're going to be able to pause these videos so that you can get this stuff down. Adhesion and capillarity is going to be when water sticks to something other than water. So if it's sticking to a polar surface or a charged surface, it will be able to adhere. If it's going a thin tube, what's called capillarity. So adhesion through a thin tube is capillarity. So this is a picture of water on a waxy surface, and then this is a picture of water on a charged surface. So on a waxy surface, water will bead up because its cohesion is stronger and there's no adhesion between the surface. On a charged surface like metal or glass, water will stick. Okay, so that's our lesson on the properties of water. I hope you enjoyed that, and you should like and subscribe to Mr. Bradley's YouTube channel.